Joshua Tiemens, will we ever be able to definitively debunk the war for oil slander? If so, how? Joshua, that's a great question. There's two killer arguments that I will about to deploy, and you can simply pick them up and run with them. You will hear progressives say that the only reason we're in the Middle East is because of oil. It's a war for oil. This suits them because if it's a war for ideology, if it's a war to free people, then what do we need progressives for? If it's a war of a good country, I've said this on American Sniper. American Sniper terrorizes the left because you watch the movie, you see Chris Kyle is a good guy. If he's a good guy, then maybe it's a good army. If it's a good army, then maybe it's a good cause. If it's a good cause, then maybe it's a good country. And if it's a good country, what do you need the left for? The left is predicated on changing America fundamentally. If it's a good country, what do you need the left for? You don't need the left. You only need the left to radically change this god-awful mechanized corporate death state. And so now they have to make the case for the corporate death state. So we couldn't have gone into Iraq to free Iraqis and to provide for our security because that would be the sign of a good country, a moral country and a smart country. No, it has to be about a commodity, and oil is good because oil is black and greasy. And even though the machines that they're using to write their little articles about how awful the war for oil is are powered by oil, because most electricity in the country is, and certainly the car that you use to go down to the Starbucks and bitch about the war for oil is running on oil, put all that aside for a minute. There are two airtight arguments that what happened in Iraq is not a war for oil. The first one is this. Iraq is really Gulf War II. It's Iraq II. Iraq I took place in 1991 when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait for the oil fields. And Saddam Hussein put his armies and his tanks over the oil fields. What happened in Gulf I? Well, the United States, after a long air campaign, launched a 100-day ground campaign. And in 100 days, they had completely destroyed Saddam Hussein's armor presence in Kuwait and driven him back, fleeing across the sands of Iraq. You all remember the pictures as well as I do. There were the burning oil fields in Kuwait that Saddam had set on fire as he departed. So what does that mean? It means that in 1991, the United States Army sat upon the richest oil fields on the face of planet Earth. They didn't have to get there. They weren't like, gee, we have to invade. They had already done it. They were there. The war was over. The threat was gone. The enemy tanks were destroyed. And the United States of America sat on top of the richest oil fields on the face of the earth in 1991. And what did we do? We put the fires out because we're good people. And then we went home. Then we went home. We didn't put our own pumps up there and start pumping that oil out. We gave the oil back to the Kuwaitis because it was theirs. We were already on the oil fields, and then we went home. That would have been a war for oil. We had the oil. The war was won. The objectives, if it was a war for oil, were over. The enemy is destroyed, and we are sitting on the oil field, so let's start shipping the oil back in 1991. And we didn't ship it back. You know why? Because it wasn't a war for oil. That's why. We fixed the oil fields, we put out the fires, and then we went home. When we went back the second time, this is really the argument, honestly, Joshua. This is it. See, the terrible thing about progressives when they try to argue things is they're so bloody stupid about so many things. They'll say Iraq is a war for oil, man. It's a war for oil. I had this breakthrough thought maybe 5 years ago now, because I've been defending the Iraq war for a long time. In so many cases, I think we got one of these coming up. In so many cases, the best way to debunk a nonsense conspiracy is to grant the conspiracy. Grant it. Assume that it's true. Assume that it's true. What would it look like? And this is when I had this breakthrough moment. What if it was a war for oil? What if we actually went to Iraq for the oil? What would the Iraq war look like if it was in fact a war for oil? Now, unfortunately for the left, in order to answer this question intelligently, you have to understand enough about the military to be able to give an answer that is consistent. If you understand enough about the military, you're asking a question about war, you have to understand the basics about how the military works in order to intelligently answer that. So let's intelligently answer what a war for oil looks like. Well, here's what a war for oil looks like. If you want to go into Iraq and get the oil, you set up a series of armored strikes to whatever hardened targets are around the oil fields. You would go in with a great deal of air power. Any existing hardened targets like tanks or in place positions would be destroyed from the air. They'd never get to see the soldiers on the ground. You would simply eliminate all of the enemy units because oil fields are out in the desert. You see, they're out in the desert. Any troops, any troop concentrations, any armored personnel carriers, any tanks, any of that stuff would be destroyed by air, and we're superb at that. We're very, very, very good at it. So the first thing we do is we go wipe the enemy off of the deserts where the oil field is. That's the first thing we do. Then we take armored columns, guys in tanks, and armored personnel carriers, not guys walking on foot, and forget IEDs because these all happen in the cities. No, we're not anywhere near the cities. We're not anywhere near roads. We take some M1 Abrams in there and we set an armored cordon around these oil fields, which is patrolled 24/7 by our unbeatable air superiority. And there are no Iraqis within 200 miles of where we are. We're out in the oil fields. We have tanks on the ground and a little steel ring around these oil fields, and we've got a constant overflying cap of American air power, and nobody goes near those oil fields. Then what happens is we pump the oil out of the ground because that's what we're there for, and we put them in tanker trucks because that's what they're there for. And these tanker trucks are escorted by tanks and by helicopters and by armored personnel carriers and by air assets. And these oil convoys run from the oil fields to Basra, and that's all they do. And they just run along this one line, which is projected out 50, 60-mile exclusion zone. If a rabbit moves within that 50 miles, we just turn it into pink goo, and we take the oil from the oil fields directly to Basra, where they are loaded onto American oil tankers, and they are sailed out of the Gulf under escort by American destroyers and American aircraft carriers. And that's what a war for oil looks like. And you know how many casualties we take in our war for oil? You could make a pretty compelling case we don't take any, but I bet you it's less than 100 top case. You send in our Air Force to destroy their armor. You send in our air assets to destroy whatever units are on the ground. You put armored units in there to make sure nobody comes after us with a rock or a machine gun or whatever the case may be. And we simply take the oil out of the ground, put it in trucks, run it to the port, put it in tankers, and sail it out of there. And we get free oil here in America. Now, the only problem with this is that it didn't happen. And none of it happened. None of it happened. We didn't have the oil field secured. We didn't. And all of our casualties didn't happen fighting to gain control of the oil fields. All of our casualties in Iraq happened because we had soldiers who were trying to open schools, and we had soldiers who were trying to keep hospitals going. We had soldiers who were trying to return entire cities to their inhabitants. We had soldiers who were fighting for neighborhoods. We lose guys in IED explosions who were patrolling cities trying to keep the bad guys away from the civilians. And we have thousands of pictures of American soldiers standing in front of Iraqi children and protecting them from the fire from Al-Qaeda and the rest of these insurgents. That's how we lose 4,000 guys. Not out in an oil field, protecting women and children in cities. That's how we lose 4,000 guys against an insurgency to return the cities to their population. It's not a war for oil because that's not what a war for oil looks like. A war for oil is a very simple, clean, perfect military objective. It's nothing to it. We could have been doing it we could have had that done in 3 weeks, and we could have been doing it every single day and not lost a single guy except to a training accident, or maybe a guy gets run over by one of our oil trucks because he wasn't paying attention when he crossed the street. Right? That's what a war for oil looks like. So the great way you answer these progressive lies is assume that the lie is true. If it's a war for oil, what does it look like? That's what it looks like. But it didn't look like that. And it didn't look like that because it didn't happen.